Hello and welcome to Ag PhD. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for joining us today. Today in the show, we're going to talk a little about one of the most important things when it comes to tile, the lift station. What should you be doing for a lift station? Do you even need this? How do these work? We're going to talk today about lift stations.
Well, you know, Brian, you don't always need a lift station, but you do always need magnesium. We're going to talk about this important nutrient and how to dial it in so you get just the right amount for your crop.
Coming up later in the show, as always, we have our Iron Talk segment and our Weed of the Week too. But first, here's this week's Farm Basics.
You spend all year working hard to get as much yield as possible at harvest. The last thing you want to do is put your grain in the bin and have it spoil before you take it to market. Introducing the Grain Temp Guard from Farm Shop MFG. Designed and built by a farmer looking for a low-cost monitoring solution for existing bins, the Grain Temp Guard tracks temperature and humidity with an alarm system to alert you when your grain exceeds safe thresholds. For more information on a system for your bins, visit farmshopmfg.com.
During our Farm Basics time today, we're going to talk a little about soil health tests. Now, there are some government programs out there for farmers that will help them pay for certain things out in their field. Okay, one of the things that a lot of farmers are looking at is just reducing tillage, and we talk all the time about the amount of carbon that's out there and everything else. Well, in order to prove that a soil is getting healthier, the government in some cases requires that soil health tests be run. So we want to talk today just a little bit about what is the soil health test and how can you get pretty much the same information without having to spend the money on an actual soil health test.
All right, well, when you think about soil health tests, there's a couple things going on here. First of all, we do really care about what the nutrient levels are in soils, and even the soil health test, you're going to pull a soil test. But what we're kind of trying to add to that with the soil health test is just to find out, well, what's the microbial activity out in your soil? And so what they're looking for is respiration. So they're looking for how much carbon dioxide is getting eaten up by the soil, how much oxygen is being released, and they can find out exactly what's going on out there and how many living things are in the soil.
Well, with these soil health tests, there are many different ones out there. So we're not going to say that there is any one in particular that, oh, you have to use this. So if you do happen to be in a government program or for some other reason you need a soil health test, just look at whatever they are requiring and run that particular test. But what I always tell people is, you know, just off a regular soil test, if I have complete soil analysis, I can pretty much tell you if your soil is healthy or not.
Well, one of the things that we look at on a soil test is organic matter levels. And I know it doesn't necessarily tell you exactly how much fertilizer you put on for a crop, but as we see organic matter levels rising, well, organic matter is where microbes live in your soil. So if you've got higher levels of organic matter, that's a good thing.
Yeah, so usually if we have, let's say 5, 6, 7% organic matter, we've got a much healthier soil as opposed to when we have 1 or 2% organic matter. The other thing I'm looking at is just the overall nutrient balance. If I find there are some nutrients excessively high and other nutrients completely deficient, typically we don't have as healthy of a soil. And you think about why. Okay, if crops out there or any plants out there are suffering, well, naturally then they're not going to produce as much. They're not going to have as many roots that are growing. And one of the most important things for a healthy soil is having good roots growing out there, because those roots do a lot of things to stimulate the overall microbial activity in the soil. So again, on that regular soil test, we're looking for organic matter and then just an overall nice balance of nutrients, including we want that pH kind of in a neutral area.
Now, as we're walking out in the field too, Brian, one other thing that I really look for is, do I see residue from 3 previous crops? It's normal to see last year's residue out in the field. It takes some time for that to break down, and that's what microbes do in soil. And when we have good, healthy soils, residue breaks down timely. If it's not breaking down timely, we may have an issue with soil health.
And of course, there are other things we can look at too, everything from drainage to compaction. So the whole thing here today is we just wanted to let you know there are specific soil health tests, but a lot of times if you just make a visual observation out in the field and you look at the regular soil analysis, you can determine whether that soil is healthy or not, in many cases without even running the soil health test.
One other thing we want you to be watching for out in your fields is our Weed of the Week. We'll show you how to stop this tough weed later in the show.
In 1949, Morton Buildings constructed our first machine storage building to establish our bond with the farming community. Since then, our relationship has grown, and so have our product offerings. From the smallest specialized operation to the largest agricultural enterprise, we understand the needs of your business and continue to evolve to meet industry demands. Plus, when you build a Morton building, you're backed by the strongest warranty in the business. To learn more about the Morton Advantage, visit mortonbuildings.com.
Tough, precise, efficient. Strip tillage with the Soil Warrior brings the future to your farm. Learn more at soilwarrior.com/agphd.
It starts with genetics, what you're made of. It takes agronomy. It's local. It's knowing your land and having the tools to put the right product in the right place. It's built on service with trust, grit, and determination. Because it turns out, what it takes to make the best product is a lot like what it takes to make a farmer. Golden Harvest, rooted in genetics, agronomy, and service.
Increase your productivity with Hypro's dual react control system. The dual nozzle body design allows you to drive at the speed you want while maintaining the rate and droplet size you need. Hypro, helping you spray better.
Do you feel like there's never enough time to get everything done before planting? The window for spring work is quick and unforgiving. Give yourself the upper hand with the ProTill High Performance High Speed Disc. More and more farmers agree the ProTill is the right tool for spring field conditions and heavy residue management. Zero maintenance bearings, independent disc technology, oversized pins and bushings allow the ProTill to handle whatever field or conditions you can throw at it. Degelman High Performance Equipment.
One of the most common questions Darren and I get about drain tile is, what do I do when my ground's too flat? A lot of people get really concerned about this, and obviously it is a big concern. You've got to have somewhere to go with that water. But that's where lift stations come in. So just in real simple terms, a lift station is just somewhere where you've got a little water reservoir, either created by a tank or a big pipe, and then you simply pump it out of there. So you're lifting that water. That's the reason why it's called a lift station. And then you pump it out again. Now, you could see this going right into a river. You could see this lifting and then pumping to another tile line, and then it carries it down the road a little further. So there are several different uses for lift stations.
All right, now let's think about this concept first. You've got flat ground. You're going to have to create some slope to make drainage actually work on your farm. So how deep do you really want to be with tile lines? You know, for us on our farm, a lot of times we're going with 3-foot deep tile lines because we're trying to control the water table, and we want to have a good level of oxygen in the top 3 feet for our root system to survive and thrive. When you're talking about a lift station, you may have to go down 6 feet or 10 feet at the end of a field in order to get enough slope to move that water and then lift it back out of there. Now, the lifting part is not the biggest part of this equation. What I think about, Brian, is just, man, if my main tile lines are 10 feet deep, am I going to lower that water table 10 feet down? That could be a challenge when we get to a dry year.
Okay, but this is where you're, in most cases, going to put in a solid line. So typically the way this thing works with the lift station, if let's say you did have to be down 10 feet in the ground, and not all lift stations have to be that deep, but let's say you had to be 10 feet down in the ground, then yeah, you're probably going to want to have a solid line coming out, and maybe even double wall, because that moves the water a lot faster. So all the perforated lines are going to still be relatively shallow in the field. They'll dump into that big line, and then that line will hold some water, basically again creating a little water reservoir for that lift station to pump out. Now, one of the most important things that I learned early on when we were working on lift stations on our farm is it's really nice to have a good pump, a big pump. You got to size it appropriately, okay? So we know all that. But the thing is, in a lot of cases, you don't necessarily need to run full speed. It's nice to have a pump that can run at 2 different speeds because you don't want the pump to shut off. One of the biggest problems with pumps and just motors in general is on, off, on, off, on, off. So with a lot of the variable drive motors now, what they'll end up doing is if your water table goes down to a certain point, well, they'll slow down. Okay, so that way they don't have to keep shutting off. And then as that water table rises again a little bit, then they'll speed back up. That's really been nice. And so one of the first ones that we ever put in quite a few years ago now, that pump is still running, and it runs quite often. We really need that lift station to work well. And one other thing that I'll throw out here too is in terms of monitoring that lift station. There are certainly ways you can do that even just with your cell phone to find out, hey, is my pump running or is it not? A lot of people will put a light out there so you can see it maybe from your house or something. But boy, with modern technology today, if there's some way that you can have that so you can see right on your phone if your pump is running or not, even get an alert when your pump shuts off, it's really nice to know in terms of the upkeep and everything, because if that lift station doesn't run, all of a sudden all that water can back up in your field.
One other thing, Brian, that becomes a real question for some farmers is, how do I power a lift station? Do I need to run electricity out there? Could I use solar or some other power source? What works the best?
Sure, you can have solar, you can have a motor running out there, but ideally you're going to want to try to do everything you can to get electricity out there.
Probably the other most common question we get, Brian, is just, how do I size this? And so we put together a tool, the Ag PhD Drainage Calculator app. It's a free download. You can put it on your smartphone or your tablet and just run the numbers yourself based on what you've got going on in your field.
Well, again, if you've got flat ground that needs to be tiled, you may need to look at a lift station. So again, we encourage you to check out that Drainage Calculator app and definitely consider putting in a lift station on your farm.
Well, improving your drainage on your farm may make it easier to control weeds like our Weed of the Week. Can you identify this week's weed?
More choices, more money. With Bayer Plus Rewards, you choose from our broad portfolio of high-performance products. Earn more money on the eligible products that are right for your farm. And use our new portal to see your purchases, track your rewards, and decide how you want to use them. Visit mybayerplus.com to sign in and start earning. That's the advantage of more control in your hands. That's the plus.
Seasons, weather patterns, pests, weeds, diseases, new trends, tools, and technology. While farming as we know it continues to change, NK corn and soybeans consistently deliver. With the latest technology, high-performing genetics, and uncompromised value, NK helps you take on these challenges by maximizing your profit potential. Every acre, every single seed. NK Seeds, delivering technology, genetics, and value.
Do you feel like there's never enough time to get everything done before planting? The window for spring work is quick and unforgiving. Give yourself the upper hand with the ProTill High Performance High Speed Disc. More and more farmers agree the ProTill is the right tool for springfield conditions and heavy residue management. Zero maintenance bearings, independent disc technology, oversized pins and bushings allow the ProTill to handle whatever field or conditions you can throw at it. Degelman High Performance Equipment.
There are a lot of steps to having a perfect season. Don't let your fertilizer plan be the step that trips you up. No matter when you apply fertilizer, no matter how, AgroLiquid has the experts and the products that'll help you move closer to your target and hit the bullseye. AgroLiquid moves you closer to your target.
Your planter is the single most important piece of equipment on your farm, because without a uniform stand, you can't reach maximum yield. That's why Harvest International set out to design a planter that takes advantage of the newest innovations in planter technology. Built tough for high speed and integrated with the latest precision enhancements, Harvest International planters ensure every seed you plant today puts more in your bin at harvest. Harvest International, planting the future.
One of the things you will look at on your soil test is magnesium. Now we want you to look at the magnesium parts per million because you have to have enough parts per million or pounds per acre to raise a good crop. And every crop has a chart telling you how much you really need. But the other thing you need to look at is the base saturation magnesium percentage. And here's one of the reasons why this is such a big deal. Too much magnesium, that's the big problem we have in a lot of the Midwest. Too much magnesium means you have a really tight soil. Magnesium is a very, very, very tiny particle in relation to calcium. So we talk all the time about calcium and magnesium. Calcium's really big. Magnesium is really tiny. And because magnesium is so tiny, if you get a preponderance of magnesium out there, then what you have is very little oxygen getting down in the soil. So generally you don't have as much air down deep, meaning you don't have as many roots down deep, and that's a real problem.
Yeah, it's really interesting how you can manipulate soil structure by nutrient applications. It just kind of blew my mind when we first started looking at this, that, you know, on a heavy clay soil, we probably want to get that magnesium down in the 12 to 14% range on a base saturation test. But if we've got a really light sandy soil, we may like it up more like 18%. So it may be quite a bit higher because we want to hold that soil together a little bit more. And also magnesium attracts water. If we can hold a little more water in a lighter textured soil, that's a good thing. So yes, this is a really big important nutrient for that. It's also really important because magnesium is the center of the chlorophyll molecule. And when we think about what are we trying to do here in fields, well, we're trying to capture sunlight, use water and nutrients, and make something good, like making corn or making wheat or making soybeans. And if you're going to do that, you're going to need plenty of magnesium out there for your crop.
So the magnesium discussion is a little odd because with most nutrients, we say, yep, we have to keep putting more out there, have to keep putting more out there. Think about nitrogen and sulfur and boron, potassium, phosphorus. We don't ever have situations where we go, wow, we have too much phosphorus naturally in our soil. We don't want that much. But that's exactly what we often say about magnesium. So Darren mentioned already the sandy soils. Magnesium doesn't hold very well in a super sandy soil. So in sandy soils, yes, it's very common that you need to add magnesium. But in the really heavy clay soils, well, like in our area, for example, the type of clay we have is montmorillonite clay. Well, one of the components of montmorillonite clay is magnesium. So we naturally have a tremendous amount of magnesium in the soil, and like I was saying earlier, in some cases we just flat out have too much. So when we have too much, what we usually do is just put a bunch more calcium out there and sulfur, and hopefully over time we'll change the ratio a little bit, number one, between calcium and sulfur, and number two, throwing some sulfate out. The sulfate can combine with the magnesium to form magnesium sulfate, which is Epsom salts. Epsom salts are leachable, so we can flush some of the magnesium out over time.
Okay, here's one of the challenges though, Brian. Even in soils that have lots of magnesium, in the very early spring when it's cold out, it's just not very available. And we know this growing up on a cow-calf operation. We would have to put out some sort of supplement for our cattle. Otherwise, they would get what was known as grass tetany. They were short of magnesium. And our soil tests were extremely high in magnesium. It made no sense to me that availability was going to be so greatly impacted by the temperatures. So this is something that you have to watch on your crop throughout the season. This is one of the reasons that we suggest taking plant tissue analysis throughout the season, just to see, are there certain times of year that magnesium is more important? Early season availability is one where magnesium may be a little bit of a challenge.
So if you need magnesium, whether it's because your soil's cold, your plant tissue analysis is low, your soil test shows low, there are a lot of different forms of magnesium, a lot of ways you can get it. The cheapest way for a lot of people is just to put lime out there that is high in magnesium. We would call that dolomitic lime. You can also find products like K-Mag where it's potassium and magnesium together. There's just straight magnesium sulfate, like we talked about Epsom salts a little bit ago. So there are a lot of products that do contain magnesium, including many foliar products and many in-furrow products that you could use on your farm.
Well, magnesium is a very important nutrient. It is a secondary nutrient, so we don't need quite as many pounds as we need of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. But secondary nutrients are right in there after that, and magnesium as the center of the chlorophyll molecule has extreme importance for your crop. So make sure you're doing complete soil analysis this fall. take a look at magnesium, both in parts per million and also in the base saturation percentage that you have. It's important for soil structure and important for plant health.
Unfortunately, whether you're high or low in magnesium, it just seems like our weed of the week keeps growing. Can you identify this week's weed?
The Weed of the Week is brought to you by Corteva Agriscience, Agriculture Division of Dow DuPont. Finish the fight against tough weeds with the Enlist Weed Control System.
Weeds are tough, but we're tougher. With unrivaled weed control, reduced drift, and near zero volatility. So, who's tough now?
There should be a special place on our show, Brian, for weeds like this week's Weed of the Week. It's a primary noxious weed, Leafy Spurge.
Well, leafy spurge is a real problem, in part because it's a perennial weed.
Now, when you say a perennial weed, I think a lot of our viewers really are familiar with some perennial plants, and they're desirable, like perennial flowers and those types of things in your garden. That's great because they stick around for a long time. The challenge with leafy spurge is it shoots out rhizomes underneath the ground. So it has root systems that move sideways and then pop up another shoot. So if you've got leafy spurge in a small area out in your pasture, in your ditch, in your rangeland, wherever, all of a sudden that small little area becomes bigger and bigger and bigger each year until it takes over that whole farm.
Well, here's the other problem, Darren. It literally can shoot seeds out. A lot of plants just have seeds and they fall to the ground, but leafy spurge can shoot them out. So between the rhizomes, between the shooting seeds, this thing really can spread, and it can spread quickly.
All right, now if you don't know what leafy spurge looks like, I always used to joke as a kid that it must be the state flower because we see it all over along the roadsides, and it's got these yellow flowers at the top that really do catch your eye. When you break open leafy spurge, it's got a white milky substance inside it, so that's another distinguishing factor versus other weeds.
All right, so when you do see it out in pastures and some of these roadsides, the very best product we've ever found on leafy spurge is still Tordon.
Now, most commonly though, Brian, we see people using 2,4-D trying to control leafy spurge, and you can certainly do that. What 2,4-D does is a nice job of controlling the top growth. The problem is it doesn't take out that root system, so they just pop up new shoots a few weeks later.
Right, so you just have to keep hitting it and hitting it and hitting it with the 2,4-D, whereas Tordon, you have years worth of residual, and I mean years worth of residual. So what we usually suggest is for your leafy spurge patches, go out there with straight Tordon. Don't mix it with anything else, just go straight Tordon at a quart.
Just water.
Well, yeah, at a quart per acre. So Tordon and water, but Tordon at 1 quart per acre. And I know it's going to cost a little bit of money, but so what? It's a patch, and you can permanently eliminate that patch just by using Tordon one time if you use a quart.
All right, we don't normally see this out in cultivated fields, and that's a good thing because we don't have many control options. Roundup would be one that I would consider, but you're going to need something to stick it on those leaves and hold it there because you're going to need a strong dose to get all the way through that root system. So you're going to be using the highest labeled rates for sure.
Yep, so other than that, yeah, there's some things we can burn it down with. Again, dicamba, 2,4-D, all those growth regulators can burn it to the ground. But Roundup's about the only thing in crop areas, at least in labeled crop areas, that will actually control leafy spurge, in addition to Tordon out in pastures and non-crop areas.
Well, our weed of the week is leafy spurge. It's a primary noxious weed, which means you are legally required to control it if it's on your property. So make sure you understand the control methods here on this tough weed.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week's weed, but stay tuned. Iron Talk is coming up next.
What's the most complex industry on Earth? It isn't big data or commodities, not genetics or meteorology or even logistics. It's a business that involves them all. It's farming, and we're proud to work with generations of American farmers in the most complex and rewarding industry on Earth.
Out here, great yield starts with great weed control. That's why I choose the Roundup Ready Extend crop system, the system that makes the difference, because only I know what it takes out here. Yield's what it's all for. But keeping my fields clean all season, that's what it's all about. This is my field.
You spend all year working hard to get as much yield as possible at harvest. The last thing you want to do is put your grain in the bin and have it spoil before you take it to market. Introducing the Grain Temp Guard from Farm Shop MFG. Designed and built by a farmer looking for a low-cost monitoring solution for existing bins, the Grain Temp Guard tracks temperature and humidity with an alarm system to alert you when your grain exceeds safe thresholds. For more information on a system for your bins, visit farmshopmfg.com.
If you're looking to expand your farm's grain handling, you want everything to be fast and efficient. The Quick Belt from Norwood Sales is your all-around grain handling solution. Our conveyor-based system uses an 18-inch belt and a 10-inch tube, which minimizes seed damage while moving more than 10,000 bushels an hour. That's fast enough to fill a semi in 6 minutes. Plus, our hood is designed to gently direct the flow of grain straight down, keeping your crop in condition. Keep your grain and your farm moving with the Quick Belt from Norwood Sales.
There are a lot of steps to having a perfect season. Don't let your fertilizer plan be the step that trips you up. No matter when you apply fertilizer, no matter how, AgroLiquid has the experts and the products that'll help you move closer to your target and hit the bullseye. AgroLiquid moves you closer to your target.
Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH.
At Harvest, you have one goal: finding the perfect flow of grain from the field to the bin. Case IH axial flow combines are engineered for matched capacity to deliver proven grain savings, so you can keep efficiency flowing smoothly. Find yours with the Case IH axial flow.
Cornfields are more variable in 2019 than I've ever seen them due to this year's weather. Lodged corn, green snap, and poor stock conditions will make harvest even more challenging than normal. I'll discuss why it happened and what to do in today's Iron Talk. If you had some corn go down this year and possibly drop some ears, that's a tough situation. Green snap was widespread as well, with some snap occurring above the ear and some well below it. Add to that the increase in stalk rots and other diseases, and you've got the recipe for a difficult harvest. Getting all the grain into the combine just won't be easy. Plus, you'll be tasked to make plans to avoid it happening again. So, what happened? First of all, poor soil conditions at planting time are to blame for a good deal of our issues now. Cold, wet, and compacted soils restricted root growth and allowed diseases to enter the plant. Some of those disease issues, such as stalk rots, are just beginning to be evident in parts of fields. The fix for next year is to plant into drier soils or at least add a fungicide in furrow if you're planting into wetter soils. Next, late planting and rapid growth left our crop more susceptible this year to green snap than a normal year would. Just look at the internode length of later planted corn and compare it to your earlier planted fields. It's no comparison. Corn grew 2 feet on our farm the week leading up to a windstorm, and our crop never stood a chance. Finally, if there are stalk issues, you do have to look at fertility. Even though you may have enough fertility in the soil, it has to get into the plant or you're going to run short. With poor root growth, insect feeding, shallow roots due to excess moisture, and other soil issues, let's face it, our crops just didn't do a good job taking in plant food. Add to that the challenges many farms had even applying fertilizer this year, and you can see how this was a big issue. There are a lot of uneven cornfields with compromised corn stalks this year. Take your time harvesting this fall to minimize loss and work through the fixes discussed today to avoid those issues for next year's crop. That's all for today's Iron Talk, and now back to the show.
That's all the time we have for today's show, but if you're looking for more agronomic information, we'd encourage you to check out the Ag PhD Insider magazine. Just go to agphdinsider.com.
And don't miss the next Ag PhD TV show. We'll have another Weed of the Week, Farm Basics, Iron Talk, and a whole lot more. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.